You're listening to the Mystic Paranormal Podcast with your host, Sean Lonkert. To reach Sean, visit www.mysticparanormal.net. Now here's your host, Sean Lonkert.
Alright, Gilbert, Erickson, I'd like to welcome you to the show, my friend. How you doing?
Good evening, doing very well.
First off, I want to ask you, who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself for those of, the people out there listening right now that don't know who you are. Why don't you give them a little background of you?
Well, I'm a guy from California, retired. Been a, soldier, helicopter pilot, writer, teacher, mechanic, machinist, poet, singer, one-time guitar player.
My God, you sound like the jack of all trades.
Yeah, master of none. Grew up on a farm in New York. We came to California during my college days and decided, after Vietnam, this is probably the one place I really enjoyed the best of all the places I lived all over the United States. So that's where we kind of settled in. My dad bounced around a lot, but I've stayed in California, Southern California, since I got back from Nam.
Well, it's anywhere's better than Nam, right?
Well, yeah. Unless you got family there,
Well, I mean, back when you were there.
Yeah, you know what? It wasn't as bad as it could have been. It was worse sometimes than it should have been. And then I come back and find out at the end of it all that the whole thing wasn't necessary at all. And that was a bit of a disappointment. And you end up getting an education you really didn't want, basically the hard way.
Yeah.
Shoved up certain portions of your anatomy that you wish you didn't have things shoved up.
Yeah, I actually had a high school teacher that was in NAM, and when we were watching a Forrest Gump movie, when they would go to the clips of him going over there, he would always have to fast forward. He couldn't even take watching it.
Yeah.
Well,
I was a pilot, so I didn't have to pound the ground and do a lot of the stuff. But then again, I was a little bit more disconnected from the people, and except for getting shot up and shot down, most of it was fairly interesting.
I can't even imagine.
I was one of the few people who didn't drink, so I ended up getting all the crummy night missions. They have a way of getting to you.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, I understand we're going to be talking about Planet X tonight. Now, there are some people, believe it or not, out there that don't understand what it is. So what I would like for you to do is just explain to the listener, sum it up a little bit, what is Planet X?
Planet X just means planet 10 or planet unknown. That's the definition of X, Planet X. And it's referring to what has been known as the 10th planet, I guess. That's another way of looking at it, which has been known since ancient days. It's part of our solar system. Basically, it's not really a planet. It's a brown dwarf star. It's got a surface temperature probably in the neighborhood of 700-800 degrees. Somewhere between the size of Saturn and up to maybe 1.1 times the size of Jupiter. So it's a brown dwarf. It's not large enough to attract enough plasma energy from space to make its atmosphere glow like the sun does, to have a photosphere.
Right.
Or like a red dwarf does. Red dwarfs can be as small as 1.2 Jupiter diameters. So this has to be slightly smaller than that. As they shrink down smaller than 1.2 Jupiter diameters, then they can't collect enough energy to make the full photosphere, like a aurora borealis around the entire planet. But it's not a planet. It's a pinch off the sun itself. It's basically a big iron ball. So somewhere between 1.1 Jupiter diameters on the high end and down to maybe Saturn size. My guess is closer to a Jupiter size, plus or minus.
So it's pretty big, no doubt.
Well, Jupiter's 317, not quite 318 times the size of Earth. It's a little bit more oblate than Earth. It's more squashed down at the poles. So its girth around the equator is longer than its polar girth. But Planet X will be about that size, could be a little bit bigger than Jupiter, but not much. And it's the binary companion for our sun in this solar system. I should explain to your audience, too, that before the WISE satellite, we figured around 65% of the stars out here in the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy in our sector of space, about 65% were red dwarf stars and brown dwarf stars. You can't see a red dwarf or a brown dwarf with the naked eye. They're just not bright enough. It takes pretty good equipment to see a red dwarf. Now, they do have a glowing atmosphere, photosphere, but a brown dwarf does not. They're too small. So
you can see this with your basic telescope.
You can see a red dwarf. You can't see a brown dwarf. Brown dwarfs have a heat signature, so they give off light. They give off a signal in the near infrared, but they don't give off anything, in the visible part of the spectrum that the human eye can see. Rattlesnakes could see it if they were looking through your telescope.
I wanted to ask you this, too. On your website, you have a wormwood animation. That would be what, millenniumprophecy.com?
That's correct.
And we also got that on the midnighthighway.com. Explain that animation and how you come up with that particular orbit.
Well, basically, I had my son do the math. He's a bit of a wizard on computers anyway. He's a pipeline code writer for the movie industry. And we wanted to get a perihelion display of sorts to show what this thing would look like, the tremendous long reach it has because of, its extreme mass, weight. And it'll come in somewhere between 5, if it's a Jupiter-size object, it'll come in between 4 or 5 on the low end, maybe 7. If it's 1.1 Jupiter's diameter, then it could be as high as 11 times Jupiter's weight based on density. Basically, it's a big, giant cannonball. It's a pinch off the sun itself, formed during the early days of the solar system formation. There's a kind of a Z-pinch effect. So anyway, we wanted a picture of what this looked like at perihelion. And this is what we came up with. We use a 3,660-year periodicity for starters, and makes a pretty good animation. That way people can get a visual of what it looks like, as it's cutting through the solar system on perihelion.
Now, when you say wormwood, that is mentioned in the book of Revelation. Are we talking about some kind of biblical event?
Yes.
Go into that a little bit.
Well, the Revelation is really the starting point, if you would, for this kind of thing, at least for me. The problem was that you have a list of things that are described, some of which appear to happen almost supernaturally, but the result is quite physical. So in order to make the Revelation make sense, I've been digging into this for like 40 years, trying to figure out what is the driver mechanism that would produce these kinds of physical results. And you're into it, in Revelation 6 and 7 and 8. And then there's a separate set of events that happen in Revelation 16. And it turns out that of all the things that could drive these kinds of reactions, based on the timing of the planetary movements, you could in fact get stuff like this. Wormwood has a tremendous amount of space junk orbiting around it. So when Revelation 8 describes the coming incineration event, it says that 1/3 of the Earth will be incinerated, will be burned up. Well, what that means is wormwood is gathering huge amounts, hundreds of billions of tons of methane ice from the Oort cloud and from the Kuiper belt. There's a lot of methane ice out there. And it can collect this stuff. And it brings it in and throws it into the atmosphere. Well, that wouldn't mean much for the other planets because they have methane atmospheres, or carbon dioxide like Mars, or carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid like Venus. But the planet Earth has 20% oxygen to work with. So when you throw methane ice into the atmosphere of the Earth, these big balls of ice come screaming down, they melt, and they catch on fire because of the heat of re-entry, if you would, into the atmosphere. So fire literally rains in from the sky because of all this space junk that Wormwood has the ability to gather up, from the collection of the sun's trans-Neptunian objects and Oort cloud space junk. And it just helps itself.
Do you get a lot of people out there that call you a doomsdayer or a fearmonger, talking about stuff like this?
To be honest, I really didn't want to get into it. My problem was that, I'd taken so much time in my life to try to develop a positive attitude and
right.
And doing, and as an inventor, you really do have to believe in stuff with a great deal of faith, before you go designing a project or a piece of equipment or something, that somebody's going to find use out of it, or that it's going to work like you think it will, and so forth. And that takes a lot of positive attitude. So to get into this fear-mongering thing, that just really wasn't my mindset. My problem, though, was to try to solve the puzzle, if you would, that the revelation presented. So how do you solve that problem? What is the driver mechanism that could make all these things happen? The descriptions are very graphic. They're harsh. They're extreme. But what could drive all of that? Okay? So it's more a problem of answering the question of what could drive these kinds of reactions. That's where I was coming from. I didn't intend to start out as a fearmonger. It wasn't my preferred mode of thinking, if you would.
And you know what, Gil? By the same token, if you look at the Bible, the way it's written, there's a lot of fear. So, you can look at the Bible as almost being a fearmonger. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like the stuff raining down from the sky, mountains falling from the sky, it goes on and on. That's some pretty scary stuff. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask is because, Googling this and looking it up online, information about Planet X, I've noticed with the people into the topic, it's like 50-50. A lot of people are saying it's real, and there's scientific proof that it is, while others are saying that, there's fearmongers. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
I'm going to side with those who say it's real, and I'll give you the reasons now.
Okay.
Number one, because the designer of the universe says it's real. John 1 and Colossians 1. Jesus Christ is the designer and wise master builder, general contractor of the universe. And if he says wormwood is there, Revelation 8, you can bet your sweet ass wormwood is there because he says it's there. Well, he knows.
No, I agree. I agree with you 100% on that.
He knows how to build solar systems. And if he knows how to build solar systems, and he uses a particular methodology, with the plasma charge and Coriolis effect and, gravitational attraction and on and on and on. These are the tools he uses to build solar systems. So if he builds solar systems, and the solar systems are binary most of the time, okay, and it turns out it's about 82% of the time, and that number is climbing, then, and he says it's there, that it's coming, that it has an alkaline atmosphere and it's going to throw this junk around, you can bet that somebody who knows what he's doing and can build solar systems is telling you the truth. So that's the first thing. Okay, the Revelation says so. All right, now, statistically, we want to look at it a little bit different than the way you normally get from fearmongers. They're just looking for headlines. That wasn't my motivation, but, we'll just go with my motivation. What I was looking to do was to explain something, and it turned out there was no other driver mechanism that could explain so many things so well as this one approach. And then last year the WISE satellite finished gathering all its information, and they discovered with that piece of equipment there was 100 brand new brown dwarf stars out there that they didn't know about. 100 of them. I said, whoa, dude. So that was a good piece of gear. And in 6 months it had mapped the entire sky. And in our stellar neighborhood, within 50 parsecs of us, was it 50? Yeah, 50 parsecs of us, we ended up with, they could see 100 brand new stars, brown dwarf stars. So they're quite common. And closer in, about 82% of the stars that are out there are red and brown dwarfs. So the little stars dominate the sky statistically on a nose count basis. When you look up at a starry sky, you're seeing about 18% of what's really there.
Wow.
All right, now you grab a hold of that. Now here's the hard part for those who want to be naysayers. Would you go to Vegas and bet consistently when the odds were 18% in your favor and 82% against you, or 83% against you? Would you bet that way? Answer.
No way.
No way. Why? Because if you knew ahead of time the odds were 82%, 83% against you, you don't take the bet. That's a bad bet. I mean, it's not that people don't do that, because they do. But the point is that if you knew that that's what the odds were, you wouldn't take the bet. You're looking for something that's a little bit more even odds. You know, red and black or something. But you don't take an 82% chance against you. Okay? Yet, 82% of the stars are binary and small. So we know now that the stars are binary, mostly binary, and most of them are small. You can't even see them. And the brown dwarf stars, you have to have infrared capability to see them, because you can't see them by a light signature. You have to look at them in the near infrared. So small stars dominate on a nose count basis. All right?
Okay.
And if the sun, if it flipped the odds back the other way, the odds then become 82% that the sun is also a binary, like 82% of the other stars. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, yes.
All right. Then the question comes, okay, well, if the sun is, the odds are 82% or more, that the sun is a binary, where is the sun's binary companion?
Now that's getting deep right
now
there.
Now you're asking the correct question. Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
So it's not a fear-mongering issue. It's a solar system construction issue and a statistical process issue. So if we can't see the sun's binary companion, then it's not a red dwarf because they're visible. It must be a brown dwarf. Then that means we have to be looking for it in the infrared part of the spectrum. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so anyway, from a statistical point of view, since so many stars are binary pairs, that's just how it is, I wouldn't want to take the fear-mongering label, but I wouldn't want to bet against it either. It doesn't make sense.
Now let's take a step back here. I mean, I know you said you've been looking into this for about 40 years. But
well, the revelation, yeah. The problem was to integrate it correctly.
Now, what about Planet X? I mean, what really got you into the topic? When did you first hear about it? And, just kind of break it down a little bit.
Well, my problem was, again, how do you explain what's the driver mechanism that can cause all these physical effects described in Revelation 6, Revelation 7, Revelation 8, and Revelation 16. Not the political effects in chapter 9 and so on, but the physical effects, 6, 7, 8, and chapter 16. What drives that? That was the big one. It wasn't until our good buddy, you've interviewed him, Dr. Jason Rand.
Yes, many times. Great guy.
With his book, yeah. And I realized he'd hit the nail on the head, and what we had to do was put it together correctly and try to fill out that description. And that if we could, we might have something in terms of a grip. We also had at least one source from inside the Pentagon, not Beltway, but inside the, let's just say, connected insider, who told us that from the best information that they had, the thing would be 60 times Jupiter's mass, and it would be orbiting at 90 degrees to the ecliptic plane. So that's where those diagrams came from on the website. Okay?
Okay.
All right, now we have to impose a little bit of other order to it. If it is a body orbiting anything in space, it will orbit and it will spin, because that's what the plasma energy of space does to bodies. It makes them spin, makes them twirl on an axis. The axis then would be approximately, not exactly, approximately perpendicular to the orbital plane. In other words, when it generates an ellipse in three-dimensional space, that ellipse is on a plane, okay? And that plane then is at 90 degrees to the ecliptic plane generated by the sun and its planets. So with that information, I started trying to impose order. Okay, what would we have? And I started filling in the blanks, and then more and more information kept coming in about brown dwarfs in general. And as we work our way through the different pieces of information, the clues, you try to construct a basic idea what it is that's going on. Well, the surface temperature is 700 degrees, it's 800 degrees, it's pretty hot, but it's not hot enough to give off light. I mean, you can heat up a piece of iron 700 degrees, and you're not going to be able to see it. It's not bright enough yet. You get it up closer to the melting point, 11 or 1200 degrees, now it starts to glow red. And you can see it then.
Very interesting, very interesting.
Okay? So then, by putting these clues together, we come up with a better profile as to what it actually is. So it's a giant cannonball, probably somewhere between Saturn size and Jupiter size. I'm guessing more toward Jupiter size. Upper limit probably around 1.1 Jupiter's diameters max. Could be smaller, plus or minus. We don't know because, again, I don't have access to classified information. And it's a brown dwarf. It's the binary companion of the sun. It's mostly iron, so it'll have, if it's a Jupiter-sized object, it'll be probably in the 7 to 8 times Jupiter's mass, in that range. Okay?
I gotcha.
And if it's 1.1 Jupiter's diameters, then it'll be about 11 times Jupiter's mass. And that's about the upper limit. Lower limit, Saturn size, so anywhere from there on down. Brown dwarf star, alkaline atmosphere, gathers Oort cloud junk, comets, asteroids, pieces of space junk, all kinds of methane ice and crap out of the Oort cloud, the trans-Neptunian objects, and so on. And when it comes in on perihelion, it's loaded for bear with lots of junk. It also seems to have a tremendous capacitive charge. So the juice coming out of the sun plus Wormwood's own spin and its volcanic action seems to loft billions of tons of highly charged iron oxide particles out into its upper atmosphere and from there out into its disk. So it creates a reddish-brown dust, and it's got a kind of a rusty, dusty disk to it. And when the Revelation describes hail and fire mixed with blood, a red color, that's iron oxide talking. Okay, and it comes screaming into the atmosphere, billions of tons of it, and it's a mess. So we've learned some things, if you would, by piecing the clues together over the years, and this is the picture that emerges. And we finally have an answer to what the driver mechanism would be that the prophecy, the Revelation prophecy, describes as something that's going to happen. We have a driver mechanism that explains how it will happen.
Out of all the people that I've interviewed about this, I really like the way you put that, the driving mechanism behind the Bible's words. I mean, just the way you described that, I really like that.
Hey, I'm a mechanic, a machinist, and I like to drive, so what can I tell you?
And you like to fly, right?
And I like to fly, what can I tell you?
Now let me ask you this.
But the point is that if you've got these physical effects, then what makes that happen?
Exactly.
That was my question. That's how I approached the problem. And Jason Rand was the only one who even got roughly close. The clue was that he described the possibility of two sets of events. That's what clicked with me, because that's what happens in the Revelation. There's a description of some very raunchy effects that happen in chapter 8. And then you've got a delay for 3.5 years. And here comes another set of effects that happen in chapter 16. They're raunchy. They're bad. And Jason Rand was the one who kind of pointed out that it would come. There would be two sets of these things. Yes. So we met when he was out here a couple of times. Had him here at my house, and we met down in L.A., and we talked it over, and I asked him if it'd be okay if I took this and tried to see if we could flesh it out and make it make some sense. And he agreed. And we kicked it back and forth, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Jason's a great guy.
He's a great guy.
I wanted to ask you
I
this,
owe a debt to him for coming up with the initial impetus for it. But the delay between the two sets of events, that's the one that really clicked hard. And it makes sense. It's a perihelion maneuver, so you've got a set of inbound effects, 6, 7, and 8, and then you've got a set of outbound effects, chapter 16. And it just makes perfect sense.
Now, we're going to get into that in a minute, but I want to ask you about the time frame of this. I mean, when will we be able to actually see this, and what will it look like? I know you said right now we can't see it, but when we do, what will it be like?
Well, it's a big black ball, probably with what looks like volcanic fissures and stuff on the surface, hot magma pouring out, and patchy ball kind of thing. It's iron. Again, 700-800 degrees at the surface. It's very hot. It'll have, as it approaches the ecliptic plane and starts catching a blast of the solar wind, it's going to begin to throw a coma, and its atmosphere will light up, and we'll get a bit of a showing of like a red glow around it, and it's going to throw the most god-awful, long, hairy-looking coma out behind it that'll probably be multi-stranded, and it will go millions and millions of miles out behind it. So it's going to be a raging, screaming-looking thing.
How big would that be in the sky? How big would that look in the sky?
Well, the Colburn Bible describes it as taking up, I think it's something like 20% of your field of vision when you look up into the sky.
Wow.
So when at its closest point, as it flies overhead, and you look up, about 20% of your field of vision in the nighttime sky is going to be very big and very impressive.
So, when this Planet X... Alright, well, let me go back for a minute. We're talking Planet X. We're also talking Wormwood. Same thing. What about Nibiru? That always comes up with Planet X.
Same thing. Nibiru was the name used by the Sumerians. Zechariah Sitchin made that popular. And Nibiru is a very good descriptor from the ancient culture. It means literally it means the planet of the crossing. In other words, instead of going around, ring around the rosy like the other planets do in the ecliptic plane, this thing is at 90 degrees to it. So it cuts across all the others. You follow?
I gotcha.
And so its description is from the ancient culture, Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, is actually a very accurate description. It's an eyewitness description of the orbital pattern during its perihelion maneuver. It looks like it crosses the sky the wrong way. So maybe the planets are supposed to go around this way. What's this thing doing? It flies right overhead. You say, whoa, dude, this is scary. Yeah, it is. And so that's what that means. Nibiru is the planet of the crossing. That's what that means.
Now, what effects will this...
Oh, there's one more. Hang on. Let me...
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's also referred to by the ancient Babylonians as Marduk, M-A-R-D-U-K, Marduk, and that means the bull calf of the sun. Yeah. They were not as dumb as we thought they are.
A binary star, right?
Yeah, the bull calf of the sun, the planet of the crossing. Very, very descriptive kinds of names. Nibiru, Marduk. My goodness, those are, they were very observant people, and their names for this thing were quite interesting. And then the Bible, of course, bitterness or wormwood, something that can throw around a lot of alkaline chemicals. And sure enough, they have, methane and chlorine-based atmosphere, ammonia, a lot of ammonia, very bitter.
Now, how soon do you think until this actually takes place, a passing?
I'd have to guess. I tried once to guess already without access to classified data, and that was a disaster. So I can give you scuttlebutt guesses, but they're just scuttlebutt. Without access, in science, you always take the measured results if you can get them, because measurement data trumps speculation. You follow?
I gotcha. Oh yeah.
I don't have access to that because the government doesn't want to let go of that stuff. It won't tell people what's going on. They've been tracking it. They know where it is. They know what it looks like, what its perihelion pattern is, but they don't want to let go of that information. So the best waypoints that I could come up with were 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2017. But do I know any of those to be true? No. Those are just guesses, the things I've been able to gather. I wish I knew. I really do. If I knew, I would tell you.
Oh, believe me, I think we all wish we knew that. Or maybe we don't,
If you did, it meant that you would have a better handle on preparation time to climb for preparation,
Isn't it kind of weird how you got doomsday preppers on TV now? You got all these different kind of shows. There's another one called The Colony, and yet we're we're in the year that everybody says could be the end of the world, December 21st, 2012. Isn't it just weird how all of this is just coming together? I mean, there is a change taking place. Weather phenomena, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, it's getting hairy. It really is.
So let's move in to when this object, this brown dwarf star, Nibiru or Planet X, whichever you may be, when it passes by Earth. I know you said there's it's going to pass by and then it's going to come back around. Break that down a little bit. What's life like what is life going to be like on here on planet Earth? What's going to happen?
Okay. There will be some presaging events. Then there will be the actual physical passage where you can see it. And again, this is a big thing, so it dominates the sky, depending on where we are orbitally. If we could sit in the June 21st position, basically, and just sit there, spin, day-night spinning on axis, but not move orbitally, then it would come in a straight line right up Ascension 18, up from below the ecliptic plane, and then it would appear to fly just kind of like straight up, and then it would get closer and closer, and it would fly straight overhead. That's what it would look like. But of course, the Earth is always moving, roughly a degree per day. Okay? So we don't just sit still. We spin on axis, plus we orbit. So the timing will change the show. If we're out in the March position or the September position, we're 90 million miles away from that solstice line. But if we were on the solstice line, it would fly directly overhead. You follow?
I'm following.
It depends on how the timing actually plays out in terms of what we would see, where we actually end up being at the time that this thing passes, flying overhead. Now, it comes through the ecliptic plane, pierces up through the ecliptic plane, about halfway between the main asteroid belt and the center line of the orbit of Jupiter. Okay, and it's coming inbound on an angle at that point. So, if we happen to be fairly close, end of May, early June, and this thing flies overhead of the solstice line position, then it's going to be a very dramatic event and very destructive. If we happen to be a little farther away, March, April, May, September, October, on either side in terms of orbital position, then it will be a little bit less dramatic looking. Okay, I kind of tend to think it's going to be a little bit more dramatic, which would suggest a late May or late June, early August. But I don't know. I just don't know. And so the closer we are to the solstice line, the bigger it's going to look. It's going to appear. You follow?
I'm following you.
Because it comes up right Ascension 18, flies overhead, perihelion, right across over the top of the sun, and then comes back down and goes back through the ecliptic plane at right ascension, along right ascension 6. Now, the node of right ascension, inbound, where it comes up through the plane, ecliptic plane, is about 3.95 to 4.0 astronomic units, Earth orbital radiuses. And that puts it roughly about halfway, between the main asteroid belt and Jupiter. So that's where it comes up through. And again, because it's starting to curve over. It'll be coming in at kind of an angle. Thus the description by the ancients, the planet of the crossing, the bull calf of the sun, and so on. I hope that helps a little bit. Did you want to get into the destructive effects that it will produce?
Yeah, I wanted you to touch base on that. I know it might be some scary stuff, and I know the Bible and the book of Revelation, it describes some pretty scary stuff, but scientifically, I mean, what could happen? Are we talking earthquakes, tsunamis? What are we looking at here?
Oh, yeah. I can give you the main events, the massive destructive events, as described in Revelation 8. When the first thing that happens, it says there was hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up; it was incinerated. It's so bad that 1/3 of the trees are just destroyed, and basically everywhere it hits, the green grass is just burned up. Okay?
I gotcha.
The gravitational effect is so rough that one of the big volcanic islands is shaken so badly it gets thrown into the ocean. You're probably aware of the danger that is out there in La Palma Island, La Cumbre Vieja.
Oh, yes.
Okay, well, let's see what would happen if that one gets thrown into the ocean. The same thing could happen for, say, one of the Hawaiian islands. Could be thrown into the ocean.
Now, when you're talking about that, you mean like that part of volcano that could slide down into the ocean, and then, that'd be disasters for, like, North Carolina or the whole eastern United States. Is that what you're talking about?
Eastern United States.
Yeah.
Now, the Bible describes an event like that. It says something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became, blood red. 1/3 of the creatures that were in the sea that had life died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. Now, let's say that it's La Cumbre Vieja. We're going to pick on that one from La Palma Island. It's a series of concentric volcanic pipes loaded with ash and water in between. And if it erupts coming up anywhere through these concentric pipes, half of La Palma Island at that point, in the southern end, will slide off into the ocean. Conservatively, it'll produce a wave that goes up between 1,100 and 1,500 feet at the point of Genesis. Conservatively, they expect it to be between 1,100 and 1,200 meters. Okay?
Wow.
Meters at the point of Genesis. That's trillions of tons of volcanic ash sliding off into the ocean. It produces an odd tsunami that's not like a normal displacement tsunami like we saw in Japan.
Okay.
It produces a tsunami that's different. It's a surface wave propagation. And it moves across the ocean at the rate of around 425 miles an hour.
That's just amazing, even hearing that.
Right. And when it hits the East Coast, it'll run inland probably 20 or 25 miles before it's dissipated. Everything from the edge of the coast all the way in for 20 miles is gone. All the ships on the ocean that encounter this thing, the only ship I know that can possibly survive it is a submarine. It's a surface wave propagation. If that thing comes flying at you and it's 1,000 feet tall, it's flying at you at 425 miles an hour.
Oh, my God.
Now, do you know a ship that can survive that?
Not offhand. No, I don't.
Not offhand, no. Just a submarine. So it's a surface wave phenomenon. The wave that would hit Miami Beach, if it's 1,100 meters tall at La Palma, at the point of Genesis, the wave that would hit Miami Beach would be over 800 meters. The wave that would hit New York City would be, 400 or 500. It's very tall. It just comes moving in at 400 miles an hour and just hits whatever it hits and keeps running for 20 miles.
And this is because of the gravitational influence, correct?
Well, part of it is that, we've known that this stuff has happened before. If you look up La Cumbre Vieja and you see the destruction that these kinds of super tsunamis can do, a surface wave tsunami, they're very deadly. Very, very deadly. Quite powerful. But see, part of it is just using the materials that's already here on Earth and then destabilizing that by having a massive rupture come up through it. It's already loaded with water. It's already loaded with ash. Okay? It's a perfect storm combination. So what will happen is the spew of magma comes up from down below, and you've got a steam bomb. That thing is going to blow wide open. That'll split the whole southern end of the island of La Palma. Will just slide off into the sea. Now, the same thing could be applied to the Hawaiian Islands on the other side and do the same kind of damage to the Pacific side. So it doesn't matter whether it's eastern seaboard or western seaboard. Either one could do the damage. You follow?
Oh, I'm following.
So that's described. It says something like a great mountain burning with fire, thrown into the sea. Now, what do you call that? Starting to sound vaguely familiar, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, and how can it? And what kind of ship or boat do you know of that can survive a surface wave coming at them 400 miles an hour?
Not a one.
Not a one. It can't be done unless you're a submarine. You go down. There's no way you're going to survive that.
So this
anyway.
is when you say surface wave. A lot of people might not understand that because I'm familiar. I'm not even. I don't even understand it that much because I'm used to when I hear about a tsunami, it's under the water until it starts approaching the coastline and then it starts to rise. Now, what is the difference? Is there a difference here we're talking about?
Sure. One is a surface wave propagation propagated at the surface. The other is propagated by a slip of the tectonic plates underneath. One bumps up, the other bumps down. But the one that bumps up displaces all the water that's overhead.
So this is going to be a massive, massive wall of water that would be coming.
Right.
Wow.
But it's moving so fast. The 700 kilometers, some 700-something kilometers per hour. It's about 425 miles an hour.
It's like being on a
This
jet plane.
massive wall of water coming all the way across the ocean. Now, it does dissipate some as it comes across. It's not, it's not 1,100 meters when it arrives. It might only be 400 or 500 meters when it arrives. But that's 1,000-foot wall of water. How are you going to outrun that? Jump in a plane and fly like hell.
Or just not be there.
There's no escaping that. If you're within 20, 25 miles of the coast, you're dead meat. Well, imagine the carnage that's going to happen to all the buildings. Imagine if it happens at night. U.S. government has taken no preparations whatsoever to set up any kind of warning whatsoever for the people that live within 20 miles of the eastern seaboard. Well, how many people live within 20 miles of the eastern seaboard? Answer, 40 million.
And I've interviewed so many different people, and this Jason Q. Rand is not one of them referring to. It's another guy, and one of his beliefs was why the government wasn't saying this stuff was kind of population control. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, why wouldn't they warn the people?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. It depends on what level you want to answer that question, because there's a dark spiritual force that actually is in control of the political and financial systems of planet Earth. And that dark spiritual force has a tremendous amount of sway over the upper echelons and the hidden echelons of money and power on planet Earth. Okay? And producing these massive sacrifices of people is kind of the goal for this entity.
Now, what is this dark entity? I mean, are we talking demonic?
Yes. We're talking about Satan himself. If I could help you with a little bit with this and to try to give you a grip on what this is like, he is so evil, so sold out, that his sole and only function is to try to do everything he can to defy and cause grief and cause pain and suffering on planet Earth. Right now he holds principality rights, rulership rights here on planet Earth. That is going to be stopped. It's going to be brought to an end. So this judgmental process is part of the house cleaning that brings that principality thing to an end. But at the moment, he still holds those rights. Do you remember in the Temptations of Christ, it says he took him up on a high mountain and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world in an instant of time?
Yes. You could
remember
have
that?
it all. You could have it all. Just bow to me.
Yeah, but and I'll give these to you. They're mine to give to you if you'll bow down and worship me. Now you have to stop and think about the absurdity of the offer at the moment. So, well, wait a minute. You've got Satan, who's a fallen angel, addressing the designer of the universe, who owns the planet. And the only thing that Satan has to offer is the political and financial resources of the kingdoms that control the political machinations of the people on the planet. But the planet itself belongs to the designer, to the Lord Jesus. So the offer is absurd. Okay? Now, what's really telling is not that the Lord Jesus refuses the offer so much as that he does not challenge. Here's the hard part. He does not challenge Satan's power to offer up the political systems of planet Earth.
It comes down to the free will. It comes down to, like, free will, basically.
Yeah, but Satan would not allow you to exercise free will if he had a choice. Where Jesus does.
Do you think the presidents of the United States, do you think they're predetermined?
Well, I think they're sort of like pre-sold out, because you have this dark entity who wants to control the political process. Occasionally it gets away from him, like when the United States became an independent country and enjoyed God's blessing as a sort of an intervention for a while. But now he's kind of reimposing his dark will, if you would.
It seems like slowly Christianity's kind of being taken away from America, too.
Not really. There's still a lot of Christians out there, but the Christians are going to be removed from the planet.
But I'm talking about, you got schools that they don't want to say, under God, the Pledge of Allegiance. There was something I heard about, veterans that passed away, that they didn't want certain biblical, I forget what it was, I wish I had it with me, certain biblical things said at funerals. I don't know if you know about that.
No. But people are free to choose whatever they want. That's their choice. But the point is this, that there is this dark, malevolent spirit who does hold principality, who does, powers of influence and sway over the political and financial systems of the world. He doesn't own the world. The Bible says, the Psalms say that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. But the political systems and the financial systems, a lot of the symbology, Satan holds the power over that. And it is a tremendous amount of influence. Okay? So what you've got is this contest of wills. And these dark principality things, this is going to be brought to an end. And judgment is coming, and it's sad. There's going to be a lot of loss of life. It's just a sad thing. But at the same time, there is the offer of salvation. There's the offer of safety that the Lord Jesus promises to his people. And the Christian church is going to be pulled off the planet, will physically disappear. And I place that event in Revelation 7, just prior to the judgment events that open up in Revelation 8. So it'll be a last-minute thing, but it will be in time to escape the judgments.
We're talking about
Christian
the
church
rapture.
will be gone.
The rapture
if you want
scenario.
out of here, and you don't want to be on planet Earth when all hell is breaking loose, when the planet is being burnt to a crisp and, roasty, toasty, fried, and shaken and baked, and, if you don't want to be part of that, and you don't want to be part of the satanic system that comes in afterwards, the Illuminati and all these, dark players, then, the offer that the Lord Jesus presents and makes very clear with the Apostle Paul and also here in Revelation 7, that's a good offer. That's a good deal. He's already paid for your ticket. Do you have to accept it? No, you don't have to accept it. It's a free ticket out of town for time and for eternity. But you do have to swear allegiance to him, not to yourself, not to Satan, not to money, not to cars, not to whiskey or women. You have to swear eternal allegiance to the Son of God. And if you're willing to do that, Romans 10:9 and 10, then he will take you off planet just before the main judgments hit.
I wanted to go to a question from Facebook.
Sure.
It's from Mike from Florida, just talking about, this discussion's getting pretty deep here, and I'm really enjoying it, I have to say.
I don't want to bore you, but you did ask some questions.
You're not boring me at all here, but Mike from Florida, he's curious if you're going to discuss Tiamat. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Tiamat.
Tiamat, okay, and then the Anunnaki, okay, And you already mentioned Zachariah Sitchin. Supposedly, one of the moons of Planet X hit Tiamat. And a planet used to be between Mars and Jupiter. The result pushed half of Tiamat into what is now Earth and the rest of the asteroid belt. He says it is also supposedly caused half of Mars to be smoothed out from the blast. And he says our moon is the only surviving moon of Tiamat. And the Anunnaki created us from a primitive ape men in their image to mine gold for them as slaves. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you've got three basic sets of questions here. Let me approach it. Okay, the first part.
Try to dissect it the best you can.
and the moon and so forth. The most recent non-invasive chemical testing of the moon rocks shows that they're the exact same composition as the Earth. So the moon is a chip off the Earth during the early formation of the solar system. It's not a foreign body. It's the same stuff that the Earth is made out of.
And that's scientifically proven.
Yeah, they just finished that. It was just a few weeks ago. They went back and re-examined it. Chromatography, very sensitive instrumentation that can pick up on this stuff, and trying to measure what's in there, and from the moon rocks from the Apollo missions. And it turns out the moon is made of the same exact stuff that the Earth is made out of, same kinds of rocks and minerals. That means that the moon then was part of the Earth in the early formation of moon and Earth of the solar system, many long years ago. Now, does that discount the possibility of impact problems coming in from a potential planet in what is now the asteroid belt? And the answer is, well, yes and no. Once Wormwood enters the picture, remember, this thing crosses through the ecliptic halfway between the main asteroid belt. There's three of them, but between the main asteroid belt and Jupiter. So it's so big and so heavy. I mean, if you've got an object that's 7, 8, 9, 10 times Jupiter's mass and cuts up that close, there is not a planet. It is not possible, even if it was solid iron, it is not possible for such a planet to survive, because of the massive gravitational and electromagnetic and, just all these weirdness kinds of things that Wormwood could throw. So even if there was a planet that formed there, as soon as Wormwood started making its cuts, sooner or later there would be a trip when it would come up through there, and whatever was there would get smashed into smithereens. You follow?
I gotcha.
Okay. All right, that's the first problem. The second problem is, you don't even have to be in the asteroid belt to catch hell from this thing. Mars has suffered horribly from the effects of Wormwood. If you compare the north side of Mars to the south side of Mars, Mars is just horribly pockmarked on the south side from all the junk that Wormwood throws at it on its inbound maneuvers. The same thing shows up on the moon. The southern side of the moon is much more pockmarked than the north side of the moon. Does anybody ever bother to ask why that is?
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, the other thing, they think that Mars has had millions of cubic miles of its upper surface, northern pole, removed. It reforms into a ball, but the point is that millions of cubic miles of Mars off the northern part, the skull cap of Mars, is missing. That's how destructive Planet X, Wormwood, is. It's just so big and so heavy. So given that Wormwood was there from the beginning of the solar system, it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever what was orbiting in the location of the asteroid belt, because it was not going to be, pardon the pun, long for this world. Sooner or later, on one of the orbital trips, Wormwood was going to get it and just destroy it, because it was too close.
Do you think Mars was inhabited?
No.
So we're just seeing basically how it destroyed the planet and, pretty much redefined it.
Well, it has made an awful mess. When wormwood gets close to Mars, it produces things like Olympus Mons, which is taller than Everest, from electrical discharge and displacement and replacement. It can build up a mound, like an electric discharge out of a welder, built up a mound on one side and a loss of material on the other side. It can produce huge, deep electrical discharge scorch marks. A good example is Valles Marineris on Mars. Huge, gigantic canyon. And all the material is missing. It's gone. They don't know where it went. And you'd like to say, well, that looks like erosion. The only problem is there's no lakes there. There's no river going through, and there's no place where oceans would have been. So it's an electrical discharge event from wormwood with this huge discharge, because wormwood is such a massive capacitive body, collecting additional energy when it gets in close, complements of the sun and the solar wind and stuff, and it just blasts Mars to smithereens. Just makes an awful mess. So you wouldn't have had to have a Tiamat to have destruction out there. It wouldn't have mattered what was orbiting in what is now the main asteroid belt, or either one of the others, the minor ones either. Because whatever it was that was there, wormwood was going to absolutely cream it.
And what about when Mike mentioned the Anunnaki? What is the Anunnaki?
Our problem is that, it does say that God has created us in His image. It does say that. It says male and female, He's created them. But then there's another interesting thing, and he takes credit for that, of sending people to do that or whatever. You can account for it any way you want. But it was his intention that there be humans here. And then we have a separate race of people that are created about 1658 years before the flood of Noah, and that's the Adamic line of people. That's a separate genetic race, and the Bible traces that. I think it's Genesis 5, isn't it? I think it is.
Are we talking about the Nephilim?
No. The Nephilim were before. They were already here. There's a whole separate genetic line of people are created, the Adamic race. And that's where Noah and his kin come from.
Ah, okay.
Genesis 5. So, if you use the periodicity of wormwood, and I'm using a periodicity of 3,657 years, is I think the closest best guess we have. Well, if you use that as a period, and you go back, take that epoch, and go back in Earth history, and let's say that we were basing it on 2012, then the first closest bypass would have been 1645 BC. Then before that would be 5302 BC. That would be Noah. Then 8959 BC. And that gets you back into the Atlantis civilization.
Very interesting. I just had Dr. Greg Little on talking about Atlantis.
Yeah. And there's a lot of evidence for Atlantis that keeps popping up. All around Bimini, all around, south of Bimini, all around Cuba, south of Florida. These huge pyramids underneath the ocean. Streets and stuff off the western end of Cuba. This whole civilization was down there.
Advanced.
What were they doing with streets down on the bottom of the ocean? And the answer is they weren't on the bottom of the ocean when they were building them. You follow?
What I'm getting here is, from what you're saying, is Atlantis could have been sunk because of a passing of Planet X.
Thou catcheth on quickly. Now, how would that work? All right, the Earth is composed of a core, molten core, all right? And I think most of your geologists would agree with that. And then around the molten core, you have a mantle. The best way to describe the mantle would be as a Play-Doh, moldable, okay? Now you have this massive gravitational body flying by. It can pull on the core and the mantle, pulling one side up and pulling the other side down simultaneously. One of the descriptions said that Atlantis went down in less than a day.
Amazing.
Yeah. So what does it do? Answer, it just pulls on the core and on the mantle with its magnetic and its gravitational field, and it distends or shapes the mantle underneath the lithosphere. Now, the lithosphere would be like an eggshell, only much, much thinner. So whatever the shell is riding on, in terms of, mantle Play-Doh, the Play-Doh pushes up, then that part rises. So you can have mountains rising up out of the ocean, and they can be thousands of feet tall. Or you can have mountains being pulled down under the ocean. They used to be thousands of feet tall, except now they're underwater. So they're not as impressive. You follow? And it can happen in one move. It can pull one side under and pull the other side up. One stroke. So this is a powerful, powerful, heavy, strong shaping tool. It is probably responsible for dividing the continents the way we have them now. You follow?
I'm following you.
And this is the shaping tool for our solar system.
Very, very interesting stuff.
You see how it sort of all fits together, doesn't it?
Oh, it is. You're putting the pieces of the puzzle together, no doubt about it. A lot of interesting tidbits here. I wanted to go back to Facebook because we're getting some more questions in here.
Sure.
Missy from New Hampshire, it says...
Hello, Missy. How you doing?
Those mysterious booms heard in Wisconsin and even felt. Do you think the government is building a base underground or something, or is this a direct effect, I think she means, of Planet X?
My guess would be that the booms are mostly underground tunneling. We have a vast underground tunnel complex now that covers the entire United States. Right here and just north of us, the mountains that are just north of us at Tehachapi, there's a port there that goes down into a tunnel that runs all the way up to China Lake, many, many miles away. China Lake then is tied into the complexes in Utah and tied into Fort Huachuca down in Arizona, and from there over to Dulce, New Mexico, and so on all the way across the United States. It goes all the way to Washington, D.C. There's one tunnel complex that comes into San Diego that is so big they can sail a ship into it.
Wow. This is news to me.
They can sail submarines under the land of the U.S. and bring them out to the eastern seaboard. I think the opening comes out somewhere around the Houston area, but don't quote me on that because the answer is I don't know. But they've got an opening somewhere out there that lets them go under the land and come up. And they probably have, pressure doors and all this kind of stuff so they can get the subs from the west coast to the east coast quickly. And they just go right underneath the U.S. They don't sail through the Panama Canal. They don't sail around the Horn. They don't sail under the Arctic. They go right under the U.S. So they've been spending literally trillions of dollars building an underground system so that government can survive. Their idea is that government should survive before anybody else survives. I'm sort of wondering what they're going to do when they don't have any people, and there's just government with no people to be government over, but, they didn't think about that part.
So basically the most corrupted people on this planet.
Well, it's like we said, there's a malevolent spirit that holds principality rights over the political and financial systems. Okay? It's not a joke. He still holds those rights. So he has the right to influence them.
Oh, he's exploiting those rights, you can tell.
He's exploiting those rights, to beat the band. He's really going after it. He's been doing it for a long time. It's not a joke. He offered to give them all the political systems. The only problem was that the planet they were both standing on belonged to the Lord Jesus. It didn't belong to Satan. Satan can only offer the symbolism, the politics. He couldn't offer, the money. He couldn't offer the planet because he didn't own it. He doesn't own the planet. That's not his.
Now this
doesn't own the solar system. That's not his.
This next question that's coming in here really brings me back. This is Jake from Colorado. He says,
"Oh, Jake."
He says, years ago I heard that the government was planning on moving the nation's capital or Pentagon or something like that to my state because of a Planet X passing. Is this true? And you know what? That brings me back. That makes me think, because...
The answer is yes, it is true.
Yeah, because when I was interviewing Jason Rand, we spoke something about that, and my mind is very vague on that detail.
It's true. There's an underground complex under the Denver airport, and it's huge. It's massive. Again, it ties down to Dulce. It ties up to Utah. It ties to Washington. There's huge... They have 2-lane highways underground. They have levels going down sometimes for a mile. They have, it's all tied together, underground, okay? So under Denver, that's why the cost of the Denver airport has been so exorbitantly expensive. That's why the complex is so huge. They're still digging more tunnel complex under Denver airport. And they bring that stuff up to the surface and dispose it on the surface. But, that's what's going on up there. The reason is that Denver sits up on, not too far from the Continental Divide. So Denver's on a plain fairly high up. And they're basically trying to get move the government away from the coast because, Washington's going to get wiped out if La Cumbre Vieja gets thrown into the sea, like the Revelation describes, a mountain with fire, burning with fire thrown into the sea. I mean, that's going to be a mess. The whole eastern seaboard gets wiped out. They've already moved the CIA there.
That's what it was.
There was no choice. They either went or they lost their jobs.
The CIA, I do remember that. That's what I knew.
They're being moved in. Yeah, they're being moved to the Denver area. And all the government functions will have, a Denver analog. And they just pick up and fly right into the Denver airport, right underground, and they're safe in their little holes.
So does the president know this? The president of the United States, or even global elite leaders out there?
Yes and yes.
Isn't it amazing?
Well,
it is, but it isn't.
The thing is how they got him elected, Man born in Kenya? Shoot.
Oh,
that's
my
amazing.
God. Jeez.
Talk about amazing stuff that's going on,
Believe me, I know. But when we're talking about building underground facilities and canals and all this stuff, I mean, none of this would matter if Planet X collided with our planet. Is that possible?
No. If you look at the diagram, okay, it comes up between the main asteroid belt and Jupiter, about halfway in between there. That's the node of right ascension. Comes in there at right ascension 18 and comes up through at an angle. But by the time it gets to the inner planets, Mercury, Venus, and Earth, it's already quite high up above the ecliptic plane. And it reaches its perihelion zenith, if you would, highest point, directly over the top of the sun. So by the time it comes in across the Earth, it's already quite a ways up. Now again, it will look big and look imposing, but it's really quite a bit, quite a ways away. And from the positioning of its perihelion maneuver and the gripping power of the sun has the stronger hand. So no, it doesn't have the ability to destroy the Earth. It can't grip the Earth, but it can shake things up, which it does. It can throw a lot of garbage, which it does. It can roll because of the discontinuity layer between the mantle and the lithosphere, it can actually roll the surface of the lithosphere right around. Now you can have a pole shift if it grips it and makes it slide. There's a slip and slide layer underneath the lithosphere, right at the mantle. It's very slimy, like a grease layer, wet grease layer. And the whole lithosphere can actually slide over. I mean, at one time, Brazil used to be at the South Pole.
Yeah, amazing.
At another time, South Africa used to be at the South Pole. They've picked up these mastodons up in Siberia, frozen solid, and they open up the stomach and there's lotus blossoms in there. But those are tropical plants. So at one time, Siberia used to be down where the tropics are. Okay, so it can actually roll the planet over for a while and cause huge problems, massive grief, causing tremendous grief, or it can slide the surface of the planet around because it's riding on a grease layer. So things are not as stable when wormwood enters the town, because it starts throwing all this gravity and throwing all this magnetism around, it's just a mess. And then all the space junk and, you know, poisonous alkaline chemicals. It's just horribly destructive.
Let's go back to Pangea, the supercontinent. Do you think Planet X might have had something to do with the separation of that massive continent?
Sure. All you do is just split it off, make them slide, sink one portion, raise another. It's gone.
So there is
broken up.
There is proof of these passings.
Sure.
Biblically, you got cities underwater.
Yeah.
Pangea.
Massive. If you look at the outline of the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America, they almost fit with a lock and key. That's a very popular kind of theory down in Latin America, you know, amongst geologists, university systems down there. They dig on that. Up here, we can't have that. We have to have uniformitarianism, that everything that's going on right now has been going on for millions and millions of years, so that we can have evolution and shmevolution and grevolution and slow change. We do not allow anything catastrophic to happen. Really? Yeah, because we're academic and this is what we say. Really? Yes, we're academic. We have PhDs, so we can say these things. Yeah, okay. Well, come on.
Yeah.
Absurd. A geologist goes down and says, geez, Louise, something very heavy has sat on top of this land. And he looks at the break and says, well, that's interesting. Well, at one time the ice sheet for the polar ice cap came all the way down across the top of Canada, landed right in America. If you follow the Missouri River, that was the southern edge of the ice sheet. And from that point north, the ice went up between 11, 12,000, 15,000 feet. That's where the Missouri River sits, at the edge of what used to be the ice sheet. There's the trace line of it. 10,000 feet up? Dang. That was a big piece of ice. So the wormwood has had the ability to cause grief. Ice ages and garbage and, you know, whatnot. It's just caused a tremendous amount of grief. It can roll the planet over on its side. And it has done this.
So let's say the government did announce to the public that this was going to happen. I mean, what would people do to prepare for such a cataclysmic event?
Get away from the coasts, store up canned food and dry goods, spare underwear, toothpaste, toilet paper, water, fresh water.
Store underwear because you're probably going to crap your pants at what's going to take place.
Yeah, they can be washed. What do you do 7 years later when you know everybody's out of business, there's no cotton farming being done, and everybody runs out of underwear? Those practical little things. How do you get the paper business started all over again? Paper mills. How do you get steel mills started all over again? How do you get? I mean, it's just civilization has a lot of wonderful things. How do you get high-tech industry started? How do you get high-tech biology restarted? I mean, there's just huge amounts of knowledge that can be wiped away from all kinds of different mechanisms. You know, I mean, again, we talked about a surface wave propagation that comes in if you just throw one of the volcanic mountains from La Palma Island into the ocean, and here comes a 1,000-foot wave hitting the East Coast. But what happens if we had a pole shift? I don't think we're going to have one, but if we did, well, if you get a 1-degree pole shift, I think you get 1,000-foot waves that come sloshing in out of the ocean. Okay, that's a big wave, and that's not coming at it 400 miles an hour. That's like the flood wave that hit, the tsunami that hit Japan. That's 35 feet. Well, imagine one that's 1,000 feet.
I can't.
You get a 5-degree pole shift. The sloshing wave that comes up out of the ocean basin and hits the coast is 3,000 feet tall. That's a big slosh. That thing is not going to stop for anything or anybody.
That's going to go all the way in.
I don't think we're going to have those, but we could. The Revelation doesn't describe anything like that, okay? But it does describe, iron oxide dust, a color of blood. It does describe alkaline chemicals, and it does describe big chunks of something that burns coming into the atmosphere that incinerates a third of the Earth, the surface. That's enough to cover the entire Western Hemisphere. And a big chunk of Pacific and Atlantic Ocean, too.
Is there any chance that life can actually live on Planet X? Any life form at all?
Well, again, at 700 degrees on the surface, I doubt it.
Because don't you got the
methane atmosphere and highly alkaline chemicals? No, I doubt it. It's very hot and very inhospitable.
Amazing. Just thinking about this is amazing. We
might have a planet around it. We don't know. Okay? But actually, on the surface, it'd be like trying to live on a star. You follow?
I gotcha. Now, Dustin from Australia, he writes in and he says, I hear Nibiru will be coming from the southern hemisphere. Will I see it first, mate, being that I'm down under? That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, he will. From his point of view, if he looks toward right ascension 18, which is the line that goes up between Sagittarius and Scorpius, it's right off the end of the arrow tip of Sagittarius. That's right ascension 18. If he looks, and it will appear to shift to the west during this part of the year. In September and October, as you were. In this part of the year, it will appear to have shifted to the east slightly. In the September and October, late August, it will appear to have shifted to the west. So it depends on where we are orbitally. If we could sit still, then it would just look like it's just coming straight up the line. And for him, from his perspective, it'll come down from the zenith overhead and go right down past Pavo, or up past Pavo, but from his point of view, it's down past Pavo, and then down between Sagittarius and Scorpius, and then as it crosses the ecliptic, it'll get to a point where it just disappears below the horizon. From our point of view in the northern hemisphere, we don't see it coming down out of the sky like he will. And we won't see it until it comes up above the line of the horizon. So the farther, it's like being an ant on a big beach ball at the beach.
Right.
If you're an ant on the top of the beach ball, you cannot see the sand under the beach ball. Why? Because you're on the top. The beach ball's in the way. If you crawl down to the equator, you can see most of the sand. If you keep crawling and you crawl down underneath, then you can see the sand. Okay? But you've got to get around the equator of the beach ball to see the sand down below. So down below, it's coming out of the southern hemisphere sky, and it will head right down for the horizon and disappear below the horizon, from his point of view in the land down under.
Now, I understand that when I interviewed Jason Q. Rand, he was talking about being a worker of light, talking about actually being brought aboard an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Okay, do you believe that aliens know about this, that they might be able to intervene at all? I mean, could they be demonic? Could they be angels? What's your opinion on that?
They could be both. There appear to be, good people and bad people, so that's a possibility. Can they intervene and keep something like this from happening? No, not a chance. Why?
It's too big, right?
You got something that could be 11 times Jupiter's mass. Who's got a spaceship that can move that around? Nobody. It's too big and too heavy. You're talking about the weight of a star. It's this gigantic, huge, massive, hot, nasty, filthy star. Nobody can move it around.
So NASA don't even stand a chance.
Too big and too heavy.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh, I completely agree with you.
It's just too big and too heavy. Nobody's going to move it around. If we took all the H-bombs we had and threw it at it, they would just disappear. You wouldn't hardly even see a puff of smoke.
Man.
That big and that heavy.
Yeah, I know.
Big. It's heavy.
I got one more question for you, and then I want you to tell us about, you got a book, and I want you to talk about that, and tell us about your website. Layla from Erie, Pennsylvania, she writes in saying, I'm 14. Will I live to see my 18th birthday, or is this monster going to kill me? I guess it could go both ways, right?
Well, if it comes in 2014, then she doesn't have much time. She'll be 16. If it comes in 2017, then she's got, she'll see her 19th birthday. So,
man,
if the first wave of destruction hits this year, later this summer, depending on where she's located, she might not see her,
But then there's the rapture scenario, right?
That's a separate problem. Only the Christian church is going to be removed. So only the Christians will be removed. All the non-believers of whatever stripe or religion or whatever belief structure will be left behind.
So if she's a Christian and she truly believes Jesus died for our sins, she'll be raptured.
If she has accepted Jesus as her Savior and as her Lord. Yeah. The Apostle Paul hangs everything on the resurrection, Romans 10:9 and 10. He says that if you will confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord, and you believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. For with the heart man believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. What you have to do is you're taking an oath unto eternity. That rather than having Satan as your political overlord, you want Jesus Christ to be your Lord for time, biologic time, however much time she has, and for all eternity. 50 million years out into the future, you have a valid relationship with the designer of the universe. Well, that's a good deal.
Yeah.
And it's paid for. We don't even have to pay for it. It's already signed, sealed, delivered. But we do have to accept it. We don't have to accept it if we don't want Jesus to be our Lord, and there's another program for those people. But the point is that if you do, you enter into a royalty relationship with the designer of the universe. That's a good deal, that you become royalty.
Tell us about your book, Gil.
Huh?
Tell us about your book.
Well, basically, I go into this in the book. I describe all this stuff. I try to harmonize the revelation. I go through it very carefully and explain what it is, and all this stuff we've been talking about, in this interview. And then there's some other things I deal with the rapture. I deal with, rapture timing problems. I deal with the keys to understanding the revelation. Then there's a second part to the book where I go back and I go through all the Old Testament scriptures. There's a long list of them. And I pull out all this messianic stuff that describes what life will be like during the 1,000-year millennial reign when Jesus comes back to planet Earth to reign for 1,000 years and try to set things right, one last time. And during that period of time, I think that's when we're going to see some serious growth and development on the planet. It'll be a glorious time for planet Earth. You do want to be around for that. You don't want to be around for the 7 years of judgment, but you do want to be around for the millennium. So the Christian church will get to see that. Those who are believers who have lived, those who are believers who have died, it doesn't matter. It says, death is irrelevant. What matters is, do you or do you not have a valid relationship with the designer of the universe, with the Lord Jesus Christ? If you do, he's going to raise you up. Okay? It doesn't matter. Life or death, your relationship with him is for eternity. So he brings the church back, and he repopulates the planet, and he rules over the planet, and he divides the rulership. The political system of Satan and his dark approach to things is done away. And Jesus then, brings real light and spiritual freedom to planet Earth. The demons are banished and pushed aside. So it's going to be a glorious time. It'll be a good time. And it'll be something worth seeing. There's going to be a lot of growth and a lot of development. It'll be very interesting to see what can be done in the 1,000 years of peace that comes to planet Earth. No more wars. Can you imagine what's possible?
It sounds like a very good time.
It's just hard to imagine, isn't it?
It is, especially, you got Iran, you got Iraq, all this other stuff going on. It's almost unbelievable.
There's a prophecy about that, and it says that Assyria will be one of the friendly nations with Israel and with Egypt. Go figure.
Go figure.
But it says, there'll be a highway coming in from Assyria, from Iran and Iraq. And it'll go all the way through Israel and all the way down into Egypt.
And what is the name of this book, Millennium Prophecy? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, the Millennium Prophecy. It's about the 1,000-year reign of the Lord Jesus when he's here on the planet. It describes the transition time, which is, of course, rough and bumpy and destructive. A lot of life is lost. And it describes then what it's like. The second part is what it's like during this 1,000-year reign. And then there's a small thing about Gog and Magog at the end of it all, and then it closes out with the final judgments of the Revelation. So it's basically trying to elucidate, to try to make sense of the Revelation and to give a good, sound, interpretive structure to the symbology and the descriptions that are in the Revelation. That's basically what the book is about.
And I wanted to let everybody know, if you go to the midnighthighway.com, our website, I got all the stuff linked up there too. If you wanted to purchase the book, it's right on the front page. Just click on the book, the photo of it. You could go right to where you could actually pick it up. One thing I wanted to do with you, Gil, is at the end of the show, I always like to give my guests a final word. If there's anybody out there listening that you would, there's just something that you would like to say to them, what would it be? What's your final word?
You don't want to be on planet Earth when the judgments hit. It's not going to be worth it. Most of the people in the Western Hemisphere will be incinerated. Who wants to be here then? You don't want to be living on planet Earth when Satan is confined to planet Earth. He's coming down to planet Earth's got attitude. You don't want to be on planet Earth when, the false prophet and the beast are ruling planet Earth. You don't want to be here. But only the Christian church will be removed to a place of safety. So my pitch to the people, my message to the people who might listen to this is, there's coming a point in time here, not too distant future. I mean, I wish it was farther in the future, but it doesn't look like maybe it's all that far. There's coming a point in time when these physical events will happen, and the only ticket out of town has been bought and paid for by the blood of Jesus Christ on the cross. You either accept his lordship or you're under Satan's thumb. So choose. Which would you rather have? The freedom and blessing that comes from a relationship with the designer of the universe, or to be under a satanic thumb? Well, actually, a boot heel.
I think it's a no-brainer.
You know what? It is, but most people don't look at it that way.
Yeah.
Romans 10:9 and 10 says, if we, believe in our heart that God has raised the Lord Jesus from the dead, and if we confess with our mouth that we want him to be our Lord for time and for eternity, we want him to be our Lord, our God, then God translates us from the kingdom of darkness that we're in and places us in the kingdom of his beloved Son. And that's a royalty relationship for eternity. It's a good deal. That's what I would give as the best piece of advice I can offer, because you don't want to be on planet Earth when it's going through these changes. You really don't.
All right, Mr. Gil Erickson, I'll tell you what, man, we're going to go ahead and end the show. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be sending you an MP3. You'll have it by tomorrow of this show. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to thank you, man, for taking your time to come on here. I have to say, you opened my mind up to a lot of different possibilities. I really like what you had to say.
Yeah, if you want to do any other shows, if you have any other things that you get some questions that, people write in and email you or whatever that you'd like to talk about, we can do another show if you want. There's some issues about the rise of the Illuminati, the rise of the beast. How the political stuff plays out is pretty rough and tumble. But, again, my basic offer to the people is, the lordship of Jesus Christ makes a lot more sense. Designer of the universe, rather than a satanic boot heel, it's a much better deal. Much better deal.
I couldn't agree any more, my friend.
Alrighty.
All right, I appreciate it, and you have a good night. God bless.
You betcha. Anytime.
Yep. Good night.
Take care.